There's something I haven't been able to settle. I've been sitting with a talk Krishnamurti gave in Saanen in 1979, his fourth public talk that summer. Every time I go back to it, I notice the same thing happening in me. I follow the argument. I see the logic. I feel something shift for a moment, and then I reach for a thought to hold it in place. The moment I do that, whatever was there is already gone. I'm not going to teach you anything today. I'm going to try to understand something out loud, and I want to be honest about where I get stuck. Most of us who've spent time in this kind of inquiry have some version of an answer to the question, what is the ego? We say it's the sense of self, the accumulated story. We've heard it from Ramana, from Nisargadatta, from Tolle. We carry the answer around like a tool we know how to use. But Krishnamurti asks something slightly different in that 1979 talk. He doesn't ask what the ego is made of. He asks, can you observe it? And if so, with what? That's the question I want to stay with. In the fourth public talk in Saanen, 1979, Krishnamurti says this, and I'm going to stay close to his words because the precision matters. Thought is the response of knowledge and memory, which is the past. So thought is the past modifying itself all the time, but it is rooted in the past. And therefore it will always be limited, narrow. It can never be whole, and thought has created division in its action, the I and the not I, the you and I, us and them. He then asks, can you observe that fact without thought entering the observation? And someone in the audience says, but thought is the only instrument I have. Krishnamurti pauses. He says, you've asked the wrong question, because you haven't clearly understood the limitation of thought. If you see clearly the limitation of thought, then you'll recognize that the instrument itself is limited. And is it possible not to use that instrument? Then he gives the analogy of the drill. If you see that a certain drill can't make the hole you need, you find another way to make the hole. But if you say, this is the only instrument I have, you stay stuck. Not because the hole can't be made, but because you keep insisting on the same tool. There's a word Kay uses there that I keep returning to. Clearly. He doesn't say if you intellectually accept that thought is limited. He says if you see it clearly, and those two things feel identical from the inside, which is the problem. The man in the audience has accepted the limitation of thought. He's read it, processed it, built it into how he understands himself. And Kay says, that's the wrong question. The acceptance itself is still the instrument operating, still the drill. The gap between accepting something and actually seeing it, that's where most of us are living without knowing it. The diagnosis feels true, the I that feels separate, that suffers and seeks. Kay is saying that's thought, not an entity that thinks. The thinking itself, temporarily gathering into the sensation of a center. When I look at the right moment, I can see something like that, in the actual looking, not as a conclusion I carry around afterward. But then I try to do something with that seeing, and that's where it gets strange. The attempt to observe without thought is already thought. The intention to drop the instrument is the instrument moving, so I'm left watching the limitation without being able to use the watching to get anywhere. I don't know if staying there, not moving, is what K means, or if that's just another position thought has settled into and called awareness. And I notice how uncomfortable it is to actually not know, rather than have a sophisticated way of describing not knowing. There's a version of this inquiry that feels very alive, and a version that feels like I'm performing stillness for myself. I can't always tell them apart. The instrument is subtle enough that it can imitate its own absence. Most people who engage with Krishnamurti, including me, do exactly what one commenter on that video said. We turn him into a concept. We understand the limitation of thought through thought, and we call that understanding. We've made thought is limited into another thing the thought carries around. The tool has labeled itself and called it liberation. If you look through the comments on that talk, you'll see it happening. Someone writes, "We are the awareness behind our thoughts. That is the key to liberation." Another, "The observer watching a movie, but the ego has confused us into believing we're a participant." These are people who've clearly spent time with K. They've absorbed the language and the pointing, and they're using it to build a more refined version of the same structure he was trying to dissolve. The observer watching from behind. The awareness separate from thought. K spent decades saying the observer is the observed, that the one who watches is made of the same stuff as what it watches. And the response is, yes, but we are the awareness behind that. The instrument is very good at surviving. K sees this. He sees it happening in the room, in the person asking the question. He says, "You've asked the wrong question." Not because the question is bad, but because the way it was formed already assumes the answer is elsewhere, that there's something you need to get to, some other instrument waiting. But look at what he's actually pointing at. He doesn't say find the other instrument. He says, see clearly that this one is limited. The seeing clearly, not as a step towards something but as the thing itself, seems to be where he stops. And I think he stops there on purpose. I'm not sure this video does anything other than hand you another thought to carry. Kay would probably say that's exactly what's happening, that making a video about the limitation of thought is thought insisting on its own usefulness one more time. He's probably right. What I can say is this. There's a difference between understanding what Kay is saying and listening to him speak. If you watch the fourth public talk in Saanen, 1979, it's available on YouTube through the Krishnamurti Foundation, there's a moment somewhere in the first few minutes where the argument stops being something you follow and becomes something pressing on you directly. That pressure is different from understanding. I don't have a better word for it than that. I don't know if pointing at it here does anything. But staying with that pressure, without immediately reaching for a framework, that's the only thing I've found that feels close to what he's describing. If you watch the talk, I'm curious what you noticed. Not what you understood, what you noticed. And if you sit with one thing after this video, let it be this. The instrument that wants to understand what Kay is saying, is it the same instrument he's describing? If it is, what does that mean for every moment of what felt like understanding?